Now, I know this might ruffle some feathers, but I firmly believe that chicken meat is the worst type of protein you can raise on your homestead. And I mean this not from an economic perspective, but from a health perspective, from your health perspective, that is. And to preface this, I'm not against chicken by any means. We have 100 birds on the homestead right now. Most of them are egg layers, but we also raise right now 30 meat birds, and not Cornish Cross, and we'll get into that, why not. But chickens are a relatively new addition to the human diet, at least the chicken meat, that is. Nobody raised chickens for meat 100 or so years ago, because there was nothing on those birds, right? Typically what ended up on your plate was a spent laying hen that, you would turn into a soup or a stock or something, and then, you would do that for the flavor, but not necessarily because the meat was so tender, which it wasn't. And so we've not been eating chicken meat in a very long time. And it wasn't really until, someone figured out how to selectively breed and select certain types of chicken breeds to come up with the Cornish Cross that develops from birth to butcher, in 45 or so days. So really, really quickly, you'll get a big bird with a huge breast, a lot of meat on it, a lot of protein, a lot of people think. And so it made economic sense to do exactly that. And chicken has become, one of the favorite meats in this country. Now, there are 3 issues associated with those meats, with meat from chickens, and really monogastric animals in general, but specifically chickens. And that is, all monogastric animals are what they eat. That includes humans as well. We are what we eat. And so, just to give you one example, if you feed a chicken a diet that's high in polyunsaturated fatty acids, especially omega-6 and linoleic acid, then a lot of those types of fats or fatty acids end up in the meat and in the fat of the bird, right? And PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids, are essential for human health in a certain amount. And we have managed over the past couple of, maybe 100 or 150 years or so, to significantly increase our PUFA intake, leading to a lot of inflammation and chronic disease in the process. And so, too many of those polyunsaturated fatty acids, despite what the American Heart Association likes to tell you, is not good for our health, because PUFAs are very unstable. They oxidize easily. Their chemical structure makes it so that they easily break apart. And when they do, either because they become rancid or oxidize in another way, they become inflammatory. And so when you consume those fats and they either have already oxidized before you ate them or they then oxidize on the inside, then those damaged fatty acids get built into your own fat cell structure, and you end up with non-functioning or less than optimally functioning fat cells in your own and a lot of inflammation that you don't need. And the problem is that what we feed chickens is a diet that's typically very high in those polyunsaturated fatty acids. There is the corn, there is soy. Grains in general are high in omega-3 and PUFAs, generally speaking. And then most of the synthetic minerals that come in that feed are bound to those grains using vegetable oils, another source of often rancid already polyunsaturated fatty acids that the chicken consumes. It gets deposited in the chicken's fat and meat, and then we consume that and we suffer the consequences of that, by developing metabolic diseases, etc. ourselves. So fatty acid composition, not ideal in chickens in general, in monogastric animals in general, but specifically with most Cornish Cross. If you look around what everyone feeds them, it's corn, soy, and even if you go corn and soy free and organic feed, which we've been doing for the longest time, most feed that you get out there has seed oils or vegetable oils that are high in those omega-6 and specifically linoleic acid. So it's very difficult to get away from a high PUFA diet for your chickens, and so you get high PUFA chickens. Not a good thing. And if you're saying now, but there are, we feed our hens fish meal, whatever, that balances the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. All it does is to increase the omega-3 while still keeping the omega-6 equally high. And just because the ratio is now more equal, doesn't change the fact that you're consuming significantly more omegas in general than what's good for the body, So it's very difficult. Now we switched actually to a feed that contains olive oil, which contains more monounsaturated fatty acids and fewer polyunsaturated fatty acids. But that feed is so incredibly expensive. It's organic, corn, soy-free, low PUFA. And guess what? One of our chickens raising it costs like $30. What do you want to sell a chicken for? $50? No one is going to pay that, But we'll talk about it in a little bit. So that's fatty acid composition number 1. The second one is protein content. Obviously, Cornish Cross have a lot of meat, a lot of protein, but the problem is that rapid growth rate can actually cause issues with the texture and water holding capacity of the meat and with the structure of those proteins. And that means a lot of the protein found in those Cornish Cross is actually indigestible. The human body cannot digest those broken and damaged proteins, so they are useless from a nutritional perspective. And you, in the worst case scenario, you can really sometimes even feel and taste it when you have it almost feels like a knot or whatever in the chicken meat. Those are those damaged proteins that are not digestible by humans. So you get a lot of meat, but the actual usable protein you get from those birds is reduced. So number 2, not really a good thing. And then the third factor is micronutrient composition, meaning vitamins and minerals. Based on what the hens get, the rapid growth rate, the poor health of the animal overall. If you think about it, a Cornish Cross, in some cases or in many cases, can't walk towards the end of their life. It's basically an obese baby that you're butchering, because that hen is obviously not an adult yet, or that rooster at day 45, and is unhealthy, cannot reproduce. It's a dead end from an evolutionary perspective, and that's what you're eating. And so you get meat that has lower amounts of micronutrients, meaning vitamins and minerals and enzymes and all of the things you would typically get from animal protein. And so you're eating a type of protein, a type of animal that has a lower protein bioavailability, fewer micronutrients, and an less than ideal fatty acid composition. So it's basically very close to junk food. Is this better than eating Cheerios? Probably, but it's not nearly as healthy for you as the human as consuming a grass-fed, grass-finished beef, for example, or any well-raised ruminant animals, because ruminant animals have the capacity of changing the fatty acids in the feed they're getting and the amino acids and rearranging them to make it work for them, to make it much better for them. So even a grain-fed cow is significantly healthier than a grain-fed chicken because of that capacity to rearrange fatty acids and amino acids. Chickens don't have that capacity, neither do humans or pigs, So those are the 3 factors. Now, what are some of the solutions out there? Well, the problem is there is not really a perfect solution out there. Chickens, I don't necessarily think that humans are meant to consume a lot of chicken meat or predominantly chicken meat, From an evolutionary perspective, historic perspective, and from the fact that, all the reasons we discussed. Now, there are some mitigation techniques, like raising slower growing breeds, like the Freedom Rangers. Right now, we are raising 30 of those McMurray Rangers, whatever they call them, their version of the Freedom Ranger, basically, that grow slower, that have none or significantly fewer of those health issues. So you end up with a healthier bird overall. You end up with a bird that, if given the opportunity, actually forages on pasture, thrives on pasture. You will still need to feed extra feed because they're not going to get all the nutrients they need to grow in, let's say, 16 weeks just on pasture and, the bugs they find. But if you combine it with a low PUFA, soy, corn-free, organic feed, which is incredibly expensive. We buy that by the pellet, and it's still ridiculously expensive and nowhere near the cost efficiency of, raising rabbits or raising, cattle for that matter. But if you want to jump through those hoops, you can raise a chicken for meat in a way that makes it significantly better. Not perfect, but significantly better than any Cornish Cross, even if it's pasture raised. And, I really appreciate what, Joel Salatin and all those guys do with their chickens. But ultimately, if they want to turn this into a business, if you want to make money with selling, chicken, then the best thing you can probably do is pasteurize a Cornish Cross. But that's still not a chicken that I would consume and that I would feed my kids, because I know that the meat that I get from those type of birds that are raised in that way is inferior, significantly inferior than anything else that I could get from an animal protein perspective. But if you just want to do it for yourself, if profit and profitability is not the major goal, and if you're willing to spend the money, then I would recommend, a Freedom Ranger on an appropriate feed that's low in PUFA, corn, soy-free, organic, etc., no vegetable oils, and let them pasture, provide them the best environment they can, that they can have, and you get a bird that at least I would be willing to consume. but you spend a lot of money for that bird, and you have to be aware of that. So again, in our case, I estimate with about $30 a bird, that's a good chunk of money, for the amount of meat that I'm getting, in comparison to maybe doing, grass-fed, grass-finished cow, which doesn't cost me much other than, the grass and the labor in rotating every day. So if there was something in this video that you completely disagree with, let me know in the comments. But I bet there were a couple of things that you didn't know. I have a lot of blog posts, not on the Kummer Homestead, but on my regular blog, michaelkummer.com, that talk about, polyunsaturated fatty acids and all of the things. I have an excellent, actually, podcast interview with Dr. Anthony Gustin, where we talk about those very issues, the consuming monogastric animals and the downside on our own health, because those animals are what they eat, and they usually get fed a diet that's not great for them. And so listen to the podcast. I'm going to link it down below. But stick around, subscribe, like if you did like this video, or let me know in the comments if you disagree, and I hope I'll see you in the next one.